Viewer discretion is advised. Seriously though, the source material I'm going to be talking about for my book review is not going to be super positive. It's not going to deal with a lot of light topics. It's going to be a little dark, and it's about an experience that actually happened. So if that's not the material for you, or you don't want to investigate that, or you're not into books, I bid you adieu, or have a good day. Other than that, if you're willing to dive into the material, potentially to learn something different, or at least to see a perspective of history, well, sit down, take a look, and you're going to learn something. In my next Book Talk book review, it's going to deal with this book right here. Ordinary Men, Reserve Police Battalion 101, and the Final Solution in Poland. Told you it wasn't going to be very light and giggly. In this book, I'm going to be talking about the book in general, the summary of it. I'm going to then jump into my opinion or the lessons I might have taken from it, perhaps a different perspective. And last but not least, I'm going to give a book review, my score at the very end. So let's kick it off. In the very beginning, the chapter starts off, and it really draws you and grasps you. It pulls you in. It sets up Reserve Police Battalion 101. About 500 men, middle-aged, lower middle class, hadn't been heavily indoctrinated, had almost no military training. Yet here they are, surrounding the outside of this village called Józefów in Poland. And in this village right here, there are 1,800 Jewish men, women, and children. And they get some orders. The person in charge of this command, of this group, his name is Wilhelm Trapp. 53-year-old man, World War I experience. And he tells all the men something very specific. He told them that the orders were that they had to exterminate every single person in this village. And these men had no experience. However, General Trapp said something very interesting. He gives them an out. He tells the 500 men, look, if you can't stomach this, if this is something that you don't want to undertake, please step forward. And you don't have to do anything. You may perhaps be reassigned, but you're not going to get punished. And from that chapter, really, it's amazing. It grasps a hold of you. And then it moves to other massacres and other deportation parts of the book. They get very graphic. They talk about the deportation process of the Jewish people, how they just threw them on there, how they were just stuffed in there without food, without water. The way they killed a lot of the Jewish people, we hear about the concentration camps, the extermination camps, whatever term you'd like to know those by. However, over 25% of them were just shot. And the way they usually shot them was they would take them, they would say, lie face down on the ground. So they're essentially looking at nothing. They would arm their rifles, stick it right in between where the base of the skull and the spine joined together. And they pulled the trigger, and it was almost an automatic kill every time. And they did this to many people. They had many people walk to graves. One person lie down, shoot, boom. Say a father was on the ground. The wife comes up, sees her husband dead. Okay, lie on top of him. Pull the trigger, boom. And they just kept piling up bodies right outside many of these villages. Almost no mercy in many of these circumstances. But let's go back to chapter 1, because from chapter 1, there's a latter chapter that describes what happens. How many of the individuals took on General Tropp's statement, right? The request, the permission to not step forward and go through with this. Well, out of 500 men, how many people do you think stepped forward and said, nah, this isn't for me? 10 to 12 people, according to history, stepped forward and said they weren't going to do anything. 2 to a little over 2% of everybody who'd had no training or anything and knew that it was wrong said, I'm not going to do this. So the rest of the men continued with these expeditions, with these massacres. And gradually, 10 to 20% of the men either said yes, they were going to and hid in closets, hid in gardens, and refused to engage, misfired on purpose, or after killing one person, they were so taken aback that they said, I want no more of this. This is ridiculous and wrong. And yet in the book as well, it goes throughout and says that almost all of them suffered physically or mentally from what they had to go through and do. But yet 80% of them carried out these orders and continued. In fact, there's a chapter in the book called The Strange Health of Captain Olfman. And Captain Olfman, he was young, like mid-20s, late 20s. And he was like the shining pupil that was going to rise in the German Empire. And at first he seemed like he was a guy who would do anything. He was all anti-Jew, anti-Semite. And what they would later find out was that he would give orders to his command, to all the people in it. And he would say, yeah, carry that out. But you know what he was doing? He was lying in his bed. He was hiding, in fact. And that, they believe, was due to the psychological confusion, to the dissonance of the situation. This man was suffering. In fact, I believe it was from, they called it adaptive colitis. So his intestines and his digestive tract were bothering him. Because he was carrying the burden. He was making all his men go do it, but he wasn't doing it himself. So that's an interesting chapter. And then it goes through talking about more killing, more death. I don't really need to describe too much more about it. That's the vast majority of the book. And then it goes to the last chapter, which is Ordinary Men. And there's a passage I'd like to read from this that I think gives the major lesson from the book. I believe it's on page 189, if I'm not mistaken. 188. I apologize. Here we go. The behavior of any human being is, of course, a very complex phenomenon. And the historian who attempts to explain it is indulging in a certain arrogance. When nearly 500 men are involved, to undertake any general explanation of their collective behavior is even more hazardous. What, then, is one to conclude? Most of all, one comes away from the story of Reserve Police Battalion 101 with great unease. This story of ordinary men is not the story of all men. The reserve policemen faced choices, and most of them committed terrible deeds. But those who killed cannot be absolved by the notion that anyone in the same situation would have done as they did. For even among them, some refused to kill, and others stopped killing. Human responsibility is ultimately an individual matter. Very powerful. And then on page 189, it goes into how we all conform, how we are trying to have career advancements, how we're all involved in bureaucracy. And then the very last statement of the story of Ordinary Men says, if the men of Reserve Police Battalion 101 could become killers under such circumstances, what group of men cannot? That will conclude my summary, leading into my thoughts or the lessons learned. Now, in the book, he states that most of the soldiers, one, couldn't react to many of these at first because there was the suddenness of, hey, go kill people. So they couldn't reflect, which was important. And then two, there was a wanting to be part of the group, right? That conformity, hey, I need to be like everybody else. So I need to be part of the group. They're my team. That's that team. So I need to go and destroy that team. Right? So they all had that. And in fact, when the killings were commencing, many of them went through what's called a diffusion of responsibility. They said, well, I can't let that man suffer. I can't let my comrades suffer from the kill, so I have to do it too. And in fact, there's a part of the book where a soldier is being interviewed. This is after World War II. And said, what did you think of the killings? And he describes this scene where he went with his fellow comrade, and there was a mother and her daughter. His comrade shot the mother and killed her. So he looked at the daughter. She's crying. She doesn't know what's going on. But then he rationalizes in his head and says, well, she can't exist without her mother. So I need to put her out of her misery. I need to release her soul. And he killed the little girl. Unacceptable, atrocious acts. Yet all these men weren't indoctrinated. They were ordinary men, as the book clearly states, and yet they went through with it. And this is a reminder of questioning things, of not believing something that's told to you right away. How dangerous that is not to continue to check. Right. We've got many groups out here, whether it's in the US or whether it's in another country, who do these things, and people just go with them. They don't rationalize, they don't reflect, they don't have their own opinion. And these are fundamental precepts, the freedom of speech, these wholesome values that many of us hold dear are in danger in this present moment. And so that's how I think about it. I definitely would like to hear more of your perspectives. And then as far as my rating goes, I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10. Wonderfully written, cohesive, entertaining, dark. Many pictures and arguments at the very end of the book also help. I would like to have seen more details about more of the battalion, but I know that's tough with historical documents, so I don't blame Christopher Browning for that. And that is my review, my book talk on Ordinary Men. I hope you enjoyed this. If there's anything I can improve on, or anything you would like to know about that period of time or the battalion in general, please let me know. I'm here to answer questions, and I hope you enjoyed this book talk on Ordinary Men. Have a good day.